good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to the Narrated Bible. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Your presence here helps this message reach more hearts around the world. Now, let us go back to a night when faith met fear on the open sea. A night when heaven spoke to the storm, and the storm obeyed. The day had been long. Crowds had filled the shore from sunrise to sunset, bringing their sick, their questions, their hopes, their pain. Jesus had healed them, taught them, and spoken words that made even the hardest hearts tremble. As the sun began to fall into the water, he turned to his disciples and said quietly, "Let us cross to the other side." They nodded, too tired to question. They pushed the boat from the sand, and as the hull cut through the shallow water, the waves caught the fading light like glass breaking in slow motion. The air smelled of salt and quiet. The crowd on the shore grew smaller until it vanished into dust. The journey began with calm. The lake mirrored the sky, dark and deep. Some of the men sat in silence. Others whispered about the day. Peter leaned against the mast, his hands still sore from helping the people earlier. He watched Jesus sitting near the stern, eyes half closed, the rhythm of the boat rocking him gently. For a moment, everything felt safe, unshakable. They had the Son of God on board. What could possibly go wrong? But somewhere in the distance, the wind began to shift. It started as a whisper, barely enough to move a thread of hair, then grew into a breath that carried the taste of rain. The sky, once golden, turned gray, then darker still, as if night had arrived before its time. The lake that had been still began to tremble. Peter lifted his head and looked to the horizon. He had lived his whole life on this water. He knew the signs. Storms on Galilee came without warning, and when they came fast. He shouted to the others to pull the sails tighter, to steady the ropes. But even as he spoke, a gust of wind hit them like a wall. The boat lurched, wood groaning, water splashing over the sides. The calm was gone. The disciples moved quickly, hands grabbing, feet slipping, voices rising. The stars disappeared behind a wall of clouds. The wind howled across the deck, lightning flashed in the distance, turning their faces white for a heartbeat before darkness swallowed them again. The storm had come. They fought to keep the boat from turning over, but every wave seemed taller than the one before. The mast shook, the ropes strained, the water climbed higher. Peter shouted orders, but his voice was lost in the roar of the wind and the crash of water. They were fishermen, yes, but this was no ordinary storm. This was the kind that made grown men remember how small they truly were. Jesus was still in the stern, head resting on a cushion, asleep. The water sprayed across his robe, the boat shook beneath him, but his breathing never changed, steady, calm, unmoved. The men stared in disbelief. How could he sleep now? Thomas shouted above the storm, "Does he not see what is happening?" Andrew threw a bucket of water overboard, but another wave filled the boat again. James clung to the side, his knuckles white with fear. Peter felt his heart pounding like the storm itself. He looked at Jesus again, and something inside him broke. He dropped his rope, stumbled across the deck, and fell to his knees beside the sleeping teacher. Rain ran down his face, mixing with salt and tears. He reached out and shook him. "Master, wake up. We are drowning." Jesus stirred slowly, like someone waking from a deep dream. He opened his eyes, and for the first time that night, the chaos seemed to pause. The wind still moved, but softer. The water still rose, but slower. It was as if creation itself had stopped to listen. He stood, the robe heavy with water, the wind curling around him like an animal ready to attack. He looked at the sea, then at the sky, and spoke only 3 words: "Peace, be still." If this story reaches your heart, take a moment now to follow our channel, so you can walk with us through every chapter of the Narrated Bible. Each story brings another piece of light to those walking through their storms. The words left his lips like light breaking through cloud, and for a moment, time itself seemed to hesitate. The wind screamed once more, and then went silent. The waves rose, curled, and fell back into stillness. The boat rocked one final time, and then floated steady as glass. The storm was gone. The lake that had roared like a beast now lay quiet, dark, and endless, reflecting the faint shimmer of stars breaking through the clouds. The only sound left was the breath of the men, heavy and disbelieving. They looked at one another, so soaked, trembling, alive. Their hearts still raced, though the danger was already behind them. Jesus stood at the bow, rain sliding from his hair and face, but his eyes were calm, so calm that even the water beneath him seemed ashamed of its fury. He turned and looked at his disciples. "Why are you so afraid?" he asked quietly. "Do you still have no faith?" No one answered. How could they? They had seen him heal the sick and make the blind see, but this was different. This was not kindness or comfort. This was command. This was creation, remembering its maker. Peter's mouth opened, but no words came out. The others stared at Jesus, their minds unable to fit what their eyes had witnessed. The sky was clearing, the stars growing brighter, the gentle sound of water tapping against the boat like a slow heartbeat. They were alive, but something inside them had changed forever. Peter sat down slowly, his hands trembling as he touched the calm water. It was real. Moments ago, it had tried to swallow him whole, and now it lay obedient at the feet of the one who had spoken. He looked up at Jesus and felt both awe and fear. Not fear of death, but the kind that comes when you realize you have been standing next to something holy all along. The others began to whisper, "Who is this man?" they said. Even the wind and the waves obey him. No one answered because the answer was beyond words. The night felt different now. The stars seemed closer, the air cleaner, the silence deeper. Even the moonlight seemed to bow in reverence. Jesus sat down again, his eyes on the horizon. The storm had left debris floating on the surface of the lake, but he did not look at the wreckage. He looked beyond it, as if seeing something no one else could see. He breathed deeply, and the disciples felt the peace in that breath settle over them like a warm blanket. For a while, no one moved. They were afraid that even the sound of their steps might disturb the miracle. The boat drifted quietly under the returning stars. Some leaned on the edges, watching the reflection of the sky ripple across the calm water. Others sat in silence, their eyes fixed on Jesus as if he were the only anchor left in the world. Peter's voice finally broke the quiet. "Master, when you sleep, are you still watching us?" Jesus looked at him, and though no word followed, Peter understood. The answer was in the calm around them. Faith does not mean the storm will never come. It means you know who is in your boat when it does. If this story moves your heart, take a second to share it, so others may find peace in their own storm. Each view helps us bring light to someone who may be lost at sea tonight. The night deepened again, but not with fear this time. It was filled with something new, something holy. The same darkness that had terrified them hours ago was now their comfort. The same water that had threatened their lives now reflected heaven back at them. Peter rested his head against the wooden side of the boat, his eyes heavy, his soul quiet. The lake rocked gently, the air smelled of rain and peace. And for the first time in a long time, he understood what it meant to trust completely. He did not need to steer anymore. He did not need to control the waves. He only needed to stay close to the one who commanded them. The first light of dawn began to touch the horizon. A thin line of gold spread slowly across the surface of the water. And the lake, once black and violent, now gleamed like glass brushed with fire. The night had ended, but it left behind something more than calm. It left understanding. The disciples sat in silence, scattered across the boat. Some leaned against the rails, their faces marked with the salt of fear and the peace that follows surrender. Others simply watched the horizon, unsure if the light ahead was sunrise or revelation. Jesus was quiet again, his eyes fixed on the growing warmth of the east. There was no need for words. The lesson had already been spoken in the silence. Peter dipped his fingers into the water. It was smooth and cool, and as it rippled outward, he saw his reflection tremble on the surface. He thought of the man he had been before that night, the fisherman who trusted his skill more than his faith, who believed control was the same as strength. Now, he saw a different face looking back, a face that had faced the storm and lived to see the stillness after it. He whispered under his breath, "Thank you, Lord, for not leaving me even when I doubted." The words were swallowed by the breeze, but they reached the one who needed to hear them. John was near the mast, his hands resting on the damp wood. He watched Jesus, trying to understand the peace that never left him. Even when the waves had risen, even when they had shouted and panicked, he had not moved. It was not that he ignored the storm, he simply lived beyond it. John realized then that the storm had not woken Jesus. Their fear had, and perhaps that was the same with all of heaven. Andrew broke the quiet. "I thought we were going to die," he said softly. No one laughed. No one corrected him. They all had felt the same, but now, the memory of fear only made the peace more precious. Jesus stood slowly, stretching his arms toward the light. The rays touched his hands, and for a moment, it looked as if the sky itself had reached down to greet him. He looked back at them and smiled. His voice was calm, steady, filled with warmth. Let us go to the other side. The same words that had started their journey now returned, but this time they meant something different. They pulled the oars and began to row again. The rhythm was slow, almost musical. Each stroke pushed them closer to the far shore. The sound of the water against the boat was no longer frightening. It was comforting, steady, faithful. Peter looked around and noticed the others' faces. There was no more panic, no more doubt, only quiet strength. The storm had tested their faith, but it had also revealed it. He thought of how easily fear had taken over, how quickly they had forgotten who was with them, and then he remembered how one command had changed everything. Just 3 words: peace, be still. He realized those words were not just for the sea. They were for them, for every heart that trembles when God feels distant, for every soul that forgets that silence is not absence. Peter looked at the horizon again, and something stirred deep within him. He realized that the greatest power of Jesus was not in the miracles, but in the peace he carried. A peace that did not depend on calm waters, but that could exist even in the middle of the storm. If you are listening to this story and feel the waves rising in your life, pause for a moment. Take a breath. Remember this night. The one who calmed the sea is still near. And if you can hear his voice in your heart, leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. Your words may reach someone who needs the same reminder today. As the sun climbed higher, the lake glowed in gold and blue, the air was clear, the world awake. Birds skimmed the surface of the water, their wings cutting gentle lines across the light. Life had returned, but something invisible had shifted forever. The men in that boat would never see the sea the same way again. For now, they understood. The sea was not the enemy. The storm was not the threat. Fear was. And faith was the calm that could live even inside the wind. They kept rowing, slow and steady, each stroke a prayer, each heartbeat a song of gratitude. Behind them lay a night that would be told for generations. Ahead of them, more storms, more lessons, more grace. But this night, would remain the one where they learned that no wave can drown a heart anchored in God. The shoreline came slowly into view. At first, it was only a thin shadow between the sky and the water. But as the sun climbed higher, the land began to take shape. Hills rolled in soft curves, olive trees glimmered in the distance, and a faint trail of smoke rose from a small village waking to another day. The disciples felt their arms grow tired from rowing, but it was a different kind of tired, the kind that comes after a battle already won. Their muscles burned, but their hearts were at peace. Every pull of the oar was a prayer. Every drop of water that fell back into the sea carried the weight of gratitude. Jesus sat at the stern again, not asleep this time, but watching them with quiet satisfaction. There was no need to speak. Each man knew what had been taught, even if they could not yet put it into words. They were learning what it meant to live in faith, not as a feeling, but as a rhythm, as a way of breathing. As the boat reached the shallows, Peter jumped first into the water. It reached his knees, cool and clear. He pulled the boat forward until it scraped softly against the sand. The others followed, stretching their sore arms, laughing quietly as the waves touched their feet. They were back on solid ground, yet something inside them still rocked gently, like the boat that carried them. The village nearby began to stir. Children ran to the edge of the shore to watch the newcomers. Women carrying baskets paused to whisper. An old man shaded his eyes with his hand, trying to see who these travelers were. It did not take long for word to spread. The teacher who commands the sea has come. People began to gather, drawn not by curiosity but by hunger, the hunger of souls that had forgotten the sound of peace. They brought their sick, their weary, their broken, and once again, the air filled with the soft murmur of need. Jesus looked at them and smiled. He stepped forward and placed his hands upon the shoulders of those who came first. He did not need to ask what hurt. He simply looked into their eyes, and they knew he understood. Some wept, some laughed, some fell to their knees in quiet relief. The storm was far behind behind them, but its echo had led these people here. Even the winds that once frightened his followers had carried the message of who he was. Peter stood nearby, watching the crowd grow. He remembered how terrified he had been only hours before, how he had shouted, accusing Jesus of sleeping through their fear. Now he watched as that same voice that calmed the storm was calming the hearts of strangers. He realized that faith does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers through peace. John approached him, his eyes bright with wonder. "Do you think we will ever understand all he does?" he asked. Peter smiled faintly. "I don't think we're meant to understand it," he said. "I think we're meant to remember it. Every time we doubt, every time the wind rises again, we'll remember this night and this calm." The people began to sit along the grass near the water, waiting for Jesus to speak. He climbed a small hill and sat down among them. The disciples formed a half circle behind him, the morning sun glowing against their faces. He began to teach, his voice soft, carried easily by the wind that now felt like a friend. He spoke of faith that moves mountains, of hearts that find rest even when the world trembles. He told them that storms will come, but they will never have the final word. He told them that peace is not found in still waters, but in trusting the one who walks upon them. The crowd listened, some crying silently, others smiling through tears. If you are hearing these words and have felt the waves of life threaten to pull you under, pause and breathe. The same voice that spoke to the sea still speaks today. If this story gives you peace, leave a like and a comment below. Let us know where in the world you are listening from. Your story matters as much as this one. When he finished teaching, Jesus stood and turned toward the lake again. The water shimmered under the light, as if bowing in quiet reverence. The disciples followed his gaze. They knew that every time they looked upon that water, they would remember who he was and who they were becoming. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last trace of night. The storm was gone, but its memory had become holy. It was no longer a story of fear, it was a story of faith. And in that moment, each of them realized that the greatest miracle of all was not that the sea obeyed, but that their hearts had begun to do the same. The sun began to drift lower in the sky, turning gold into amber, amber into fire. The people had gone back to their homes, carrying stories that would live beyond their lifetimes. The lakeshore was quiet again. The sound of birds returned, the hum of insects, the whisper of water brushing the sand. The air was heavy with peace, the kind that comes only after fear has burned itself out. Jesus walked away from the shore, alone. He moved toward the hills, the folds of his robe catching the last light. He often did this, leaving the crowd, leaving the noise, searching for the silence where heaven and earth met without words. The disciples watched him go, their hearts filled with both love and confusion. They wanted to follow, but they knew this kind of prayer was not for crowds. It was for those who carried the weight of the world in their breath. Peter sat near the water, his feet buried in the cool sand, his eyes following the path Jesus had taken. The lake stretched before him, calm and endless, the same lake that had tried to devour them the night before. Now, it looked innocent, as if nothing had ever happened. He knew better. He knew what it had sounded like when the sky had screamed. He knew what it had felt like to believe God had fallen asleep. And he knew what it had meant when that same God had opened his eyes and spoken peace. He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water. It made a soft sound, rings spreading outward in perfect circles until they disappeared. That was what faith felt like now. A ripple that began small but reached further than sight could follow. John came to sit beside him. They said nothing for a while. The silence between them was not awkward. It was holy, the kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. Finally, John spoke. "He is alone again," he said. Peter nodded. "He needs to be," he replied. "When you carry peace big enough for the world, you need moments to return to the source." They both looked toward the hills, where the last light faded behind the rocks. Peter remembered the look in Jesus' eyes when he had stood against the storm. There had been no fear, no strain, only authority wrapped in compassion. He wondered if that was what faith truly looked like. Not absence of fear, but the courage to speak peace in the middle of it. A cool breeze came off the lake. The surface glowed faintly, reflecting the first stars. Andrew joined them, then Matthew, then Thomas, each in his own silence, drawn by the same need to stay near. They didn't talk about the storm. They didn't have to. It was still there between them, but not as a wound, as a lesson. Peter turned to the others. "Do you think he will always calm every storm for us?" he asked. Thomas shook his head. "I don't think that's what he came to do." Peter frowned. "Then what?" Thomas looked out over the water. "Maybe he came to teach us how to stand in them." The words settled deep. No one spoke for a long time. They listened to the water, to the faint crackle of fire behind them, to their own breathing, steady, slow, alive. Far up the hill, Jesus knelt. The night gathered around him like a cloak. His hands rested on his knees, his face lifted toward the invisible sky. He whispered prayers too deep for human language, prayers for those sleeping by the lake, for those still lost in storms of their own, for every soul that would one day hear his name and find peace in it. The wind moved softly through the grass, and, for a moment, heaven felt close enough to touch. Down by the shore, Peter lay on his back and stared at the stars. He remembered the waves, the wind, the cold water hitting his face. He remembered thinking it was the end. And now, lying under the same sky, he realized that the storm had not destroyed them, it had rebuilt them. They had been torn apart and put back together in the hands of God. And what he rebuilt could not be shaken again. If this moment brings peace to your heart, let us know in the comments below. Your story, your voice, your prayer, they all matter here. And if you have not yet subscribed, join us so you can walk with us through every step of the narrated Bible. Together, we are crossing the same waters, one story at a time. The night deepened, the fire dimmed to embers. The disciples drifted to sleep one by one. The last thing Peter saw before his eyes closed was the reflection of the stars on the water. A sky above and a sky below, heaven mirrored in calmness. He smiled softly. "Peace, be still," he whispered to himself, and the lake obeyed. The horizon began to glow once more, faint and silver. The night had stretched long, but peace had been its language. The fire by the shore had turned to soft ash. A gentle mist rose from the surface of the water, carrying the scent of dew and calm earth. One by one, the disciples stirred awake. The air was cool, the kind that reminds you that life continues quietly, even after the hardest nights. Peter was the first to sit up. His back ached, his hands were rough from rowing, but his heart felt new. He looked out at the lake and smiled. The water was still perfectly still. Not a ripple, not a sound. It was as if the world was holding its breath. In the distance, a figure began to descend the hill. The rising sun framed him in light, each step steady and unhurried. Jesus was returning. He walked as though time itself slowed to watch. The disciples rose, shading their eyes from the golden light. They didn't speak. Words would have been too small for what they felt. When he reached them, he smiled softly. He did not ask if they had slept well. He did not mention the storm or the fear or the questions that had filled their hearts. He simply said, "Let us continue." And somehow those three words carried the strength of 1,000 promises. They gathered their things, pushed the boat gently back into the water, and began to row again. The waves lapped quietly at the sides, a rhythm like breathing. For the first time, the sound did not remind them of danger. It reminded them of trust. As the boat drifted further from shore, Peter turned to look back. The hill where Jesus had prayed stood bathed in gold. The footprints he had left on the sand were already fading with the tide, but their mark remained in hearts that would never forget. He thought about how fragile they had been, how quick they had been to fear, and yet how gentle Jesus had been with their weakness. That was love, not the absence of storms, but the presence of peace stronger than them. John sat near the bow, watching the sun rise higher and higher. The colors of the sky deepened orange, pink, white, and finally blue. He whispered. The sea listened to him because it remembered his voice. Peter nodded. "So, should we?" The others laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was true. Faith, they realized, was remembering the voice that calms you when everything else is loud. Faith was knowing that even silence has his sound in it. As the morning grew brighter, Jesus closed his eyes for a moment, face turned toward the warmth. He seemed to listen to the water, the wind, the rhythm of the oars, and then he opened his eyes, looking at each of them with a love so steady it felt eternal. "You have little faith," he had once said, but here, in this quiet morning, that little faith had begun to grow. They crossed the water once again, the same path, but a different journey. The storm was behind them, but its lesson was alive in every breath. Fear had been replaced by trust, noise by peace. And the sea, once a threat, had become a mirror, showing them who they truly were when they believed. The day unfolded slowly. Villages awoke, birds filled the sky. The world continued as if nothing divine had happened. But the disciples knew better. They had seen heaven speak to the earth and the earth listen. They had seen the power that commands chaos and turns it into calm. And they carried that calm now, not as a memory, but as a promise. If you are still listening, know this: the same voice that stilled the waves still speaks today. Maybe your storm is not made of wind or water. Maybe it's made of doubt, loss, or silence. But his peace does not change. It waits quietly inside the noise, ready to rise when you call for it. Take a deep breath. Feel the stillness. You are not alone on your seat. The one who calmed the waters rides with you, even when it feels like he sleeps. And when the morning comes, you will see what they saw, that no wave is stronger than his word, and no storm lasts forever. If this story brought light to your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. We tell these stories so that faith may find new life, and peace may reach those who have forgotten what calm sounds like. Thank you for watching the Narrated Bible. We'll see you in the next episode, where another storm, another miracle, and another lesson of love await. Until then, peace, be still.